Welcome to AFSC's Restorative Justice webinar and community conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to get started. We have a lot of exciting information and conversation that we are looking forward to today as we dive deeper into the topic of restorative justice. I am now going to turn over the webinar to my wonderful colleague, Fatima Khan, who is going to help us frame what we're going to be covering today. Fatima?
Hi, thank you everyone for joining. So we've been holding a series of webinars, and it's been looking at how communities can benefit from reallocating money from police to community programs. We want to talk about restorative justice today and how it can be used to rely less on policing in our communities. So just a quick breakdown of how this webinar is going to be structured. The first part of the webinar, we're going to be talking about what restorative justice is, and we're going to be looking at how it's been practiced across different communities to address various types of harms. Now, in the second part of the webinar, this is where we're going to be going into breakout groups, and I know that we have some issues of people dropping off of the webinar during breakout groups. We just want to encourage that everyone, when we do get to breakout groups, to stay on. We're going to be talking about restorative justice, but in order to understand restorative justice and for it to make sense, we have to embody it as well. So the first breakout, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be in small pairs, answering some questions together to sort of feel like a RJ circle, and then we're going to do a second larger breakout group, and we're going to be answering some practical questions. So we can move on to the next slide. And go ahead and type in the chat what comes to mind when you think of restorative justice, right? Just when you hear that term, what does it mean? What does it trigger in your mind? What are the thoughts that you have around it? Circle dialogue is, that's really good. Some people are saying compassion, healing, harming repair, win-win resolutions. You all sound like the experts already. Indigenous, alternatives to incarceration. These are all really good things that come to mind, right, when we're thinking about restorative justice. So we're going to move on to the next slide. And one more time. So restorative justice, when we think of it, it's not simply a program. It's not a program that we're so used to in the context of diversion programs or the legal context. It's a philosophical framework. It's a way of life. It is a way of being and embodying. And it, of course, is also a way to deal with wrongdoings. So restorative justice has been defined in a lot of different ways. And that's because the term restorative justice is a pretty modern and recently coined term from around the 70s, 1970. But at its core, it's inseparable from indigenous concepts and healing practices and healing modalities. So when we say restorative justice, you cannot ignore this indigenous practice and values that's centered at the core of what we say when we say restorative justice. Restorative justice in the westernized world, as we're used to hearing it, is usually indicating some sort of implementation to address conflict or criminal behavior, and it's done outside of the legal settings, right, as some sort of like alternative too. But indigenous peacemaking and traditions center relationships among humans, the earth, and the spiritual. So the understanding here is that we are all interconnected, and there is a ripple effect when we interact with each other, when we cause harm, when we cause grief, when we cause joy. There's a ripple effect that now goes on to your larger community and to your family and to the earth and to your environment around you. So it's this belief that everything is connected. Restorative justice places a heavy emphasis on relationships between people and establishing or reestablishing equity in a relationship if there has been some harm that has hurt the equity that was there. If we accept that we are all interconnected in some way, as like the tenet of restorative justice, we understand that we have a duty to one another. We have a duty to address harm when it occurs, and restorative justice practices require that we lean into conflict to repair relationships and to mend the harm. So on the next slide, we'll see that restorative justice is a paradigm shift. It changes the way that we view and address harm and criminalized behavior. So when a harm occurs, the current legal system asks a few things. It asks what law was broken, who broke the law, and it also asks how should they be punished. Notice here that the focus is on punishment. The focus is on the rule that was broken, the violation that occurred. The harm that's done so when you're looking at harm through a restorative framework, we're asking who was harmed and what their needs are. And we're considering whose obligation is it to address those harms. So a restorative justice framework views harm being done to an individual or to a relationship or to like multiple people, right? To a community. Where the current legal system and the way that we do things now doesn't really address people. It doesn't look at harms and needs. So I'm going to keep saying these terms, harms and needs. And I'm going to say this in hope that you all shift your thinking a little bit, because when we're thinking of something that happens, that causes some sort of injustice, there is now some need that has arisen. You now need something in order to be whole again, right? Or something needs to be addressed to mitigate the issue. So when we're talking about needs, we're talking about what needs to happen in order to make it so everyone is able to move forward in a positive way. And we're also looking at what was the root cause of the harm. So restorative justice is not a band-aid approach the way our current system is, where we're just interested in punishing. We want to understand what is the root cause and how are we going to rectify that root cause so it doesn't continue to happen. And if people are inherently good and they have caused harm, it's usually because there is some sort of unmet need that they had. So when you're addressing the conflict, we have to understand that the person who committed the harm not only hurt another person and their community and caused this ripple effect, but they also hurt themselves. Because when you hurt someone else, if we are all connected, hurting someone else in turn is going to cause pain to you, or it's going to cause some sort of harm, some sort of reciprocated response to you. And when we're considering, when we're looking at the harms and the needs, we're centering the needs of the person who was harmed, right? Notice I'm not saying the word victim. I'm saying the person that was harmed. And we're also centering the needs of the community, because if a conflict occurs, we know that the community has some sort of stake in the issue as well, or there's some sort of like harm doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? There's always the spillover. So engagement is key for all of the people that are involved. When we're talking about restorative justice, it's usually what is happening is you're taking the person who is responsible for causing the harm, the person who was harmed, and a member of the community, as well as support people or family members of both parties, the person responsible and the person who was harmed. And there's some sort of conversation or dialogue that occurs with all parties to understand what happened and why did that happen and how are you going to move forward now. And this is something that our current legal system does not do, right? We don't ask people how they're feeling or what's going on. So now that we've talked a little bit about what are the values, what are the tenets of restorative justice, we can move on to the next slide. And you can type in the chat, have you seen these practices before in your life? And how did it come up? What did it look like? We'll just give people some time to answer there. Some people are saying, as a teacher in your classroom, that's a great place. Family conflict, that's also really great. So this next part of the webinar, we're going to talk about different communities and the different ways that they have embodied restorative justice. So you can move on to the next slide. The first thing we're going to talk about is New Zealand. And keep in mind that these are all, they don't have restorative justice language, like it doesn't explicitly say the term restorative justice, but you'll notice the elements and the practices as we talk about these different communities and what they did. You'll understand there are the elements of restorative justice are there. So in 1989, New Zealand passed something called the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act. This was in response to identified issues of institutional racism in their child welfare and in their youth criminal justice systems. So the Indigenous Maori youth were overrepresented, and the way that New Zealand's government was dealing with these young people was not aligned in a way that sat well with the Maori traditions. So here's where we have the birth of family group conferencing in the court systems within like a legal or a government system, right? So this was in order to address the overrepresentation, and these family group conferencing circles were centering Maori practices and values, and it developed a means to counter these oppressive, these institutionally racist systems. The purpose of the family group conferencing was to reposition families as key decision makers in response to how to deal with their young people in the criminal and the legal context. So I don't want to spend too much time, but on this slide. But the main elements, the three main elements of the family group conferencing circles, was that there was a transfer of power from the courts to the families, to the community. Another thing is the family group conferences served as a mechanism for producing a community response. So something that everybody, the community had input in, the family, the larger community had input in, and then the involvement of victims as key participants. So this allowed it and made it possible for a lot of different parties to heal, because as we know, harm doesn't happen in a vacuum. And in order to address what's happening, we need to include those that are closest to the issue. So we're now going to hear from another staff at AFSC, and she's going to talk about Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in Maine. So Lucy, if you'd like to introduce Denise.
Hey, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Denise Altivator, my friend. Denise, when she walks into the room, there's a real sense of warmth and space, realness and truth. She's a storyteller, a healer, and really, really elementally a truth bringer. Denise was with other Wabanaki folks and people from the child welfare system, instrumental in the establishment of the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission between a sovereign tribal nation, the Wabanaki, and a US state, the state of Maine, in the aftermath of all of the deep harms that were caused by the child welfare system, in which Wabanaki children were taken from their families when they were young and put into white families. Yeah, and it's my pleasure. And I'm so grateful Denise could be here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm really appreciate you inviting me to speak. I do a lot of different work around restorative justice, but mainly when we talk about restorative justice for Wabanaki people or for Indigenous people, we're talking about a focus on relations, on resolving generations of harm, acknowledging generations of harm, that not only by crimes that are committed, but acts of wrongdoing. They require a different way of us to deal with that, for us to promote the healing in our communities. So, when you talk about incarceration, for Native people, it can be understood as an extension of colonization by the people responsible for the development of the laws and public policies in this country by the vast majority of who are white. And they've orchestrated the economic and socio-cultural deprivation of Native people through institutions. And so that goes way beyond incarceration in prisons. Incarceration began on reservations. And so there's this long history of wrongdoings that we deal with because our families, our communities, our persons are broken, are torn apart, are just the whole soul of who we are as Native people has been ripped out of us. And so there's this collective understanding that we have many things to reconcile, and we have many things that we look at as restorative justice. And one of them, and the worst one in our history that went on for generations and generations, was the taking of our children. And it was one of the last ditch efforts of this country to rid the U.S. of Native people. They tried reservations. They tried killing us. They tried everything you can think of, but finally, in the end, taking of the children, they thought would do it. And not knowing how resilient a people we are, how resilient a person I am, having been one of those taken and removed and broken and harmed. So when we here in Maine in '99 went to the state to want to deal with this issue of taking the children away from our families and our communities, just to prove that they were better off being raised in white families, put us on reservations in poverty, without clean drinking water, electricity, anything, and then pull us out because poverty they used as a means of child abuse. So we got together with the state, and there were only a handful of us, and it's amazing how a small group of people who can get together can make such an amazing change, and such a huge change that really impacts a whole state. And there were about 12 of us to start with, meeting month after month. It was very difficult because for me, the people from the state, they represented the perpetrator who perpetrated the acts against me. So it was very difficult for me for a long time to be able to be comfortable and not be afraid and not feel like I was 6 years old every time I walked into the room. And as we developed our relationships with each other, we were able to become a group that was so cohesive and that really cared so much about each other and knew so much about each other that we could do some real honest hard work and go back and take a look at what happened, why it happened, make sure it never happened again, and to hear the stories from the people that it happened to, the real stories. And for us, this piece of justice work, the ending result for us was healing for our Native people. We talked, it was called the Maine Wabanaki Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So there was a lot of truth telling. The reconciliation is something that we just really weren't too interested in, but we really wanted the truth telling and the healing. We wanted our people to have a place where they could be heard, where they could be believed, where when they were finished, they could feel like they had some sense of healing and some sense of being able to reclaim that had been stolen over generations and generations. So we were able to work with all the tribes in Maine and the state of Maine. All the governors signed on to it. We put together a commission of 5 people, and they spent 2 years investigating, files and files of children that had been taken, interviewing the white culture that had perpetrated the harm, and then listening to the stories of the Native people who had been harmed. And it took about 5 years for the entire process to be completed. And what was really important was to make sure that those who were involved in this work and those who were so courageous to be involved, to make sure that they were safe. Safety was something that was so important. And we learned that the hard way. When I first told my story, I didn't know what I was getting into, and as a result, became institutionalized because of it. So we made sure that we put things in place so that those things did not happen to others, and that we were there, and structures were in place, and people were ready, and support systems were very strong. So when we talk about incarcerated people being separated from many aspects of their lives that provide what their purpose and it's their fulfillment, it really prompts distress and a sense of identity loss, which is exactly what happens when you take a child from their family and you never let them see them again for years, and you don't tell them why, and they don't understand, and you treat them very poorly. And it's just another, being incarcerated is just another form of colonization. Through mindfulness, meditation, and spiritual practices, we have brought healing circles into the prisons, because we brought the truth and reconciliation into the prisons, and listened to the stories of the inmates and held circles, and did exactly within the prison system what we did on the outside. We made sure that there were safety nets. We trained the guards and the staff on how to keep people safe. We helped the inmates to know how to support each other and soothe themselves when they were having a difficult time. And as a result, here we are, it's 5 years later, the end of the commission, we are still implementing the goals of the commission, the goals of the report, and the report that said that the state of Maine continues to commit cultural genocide against Wabanakis in the state of Maine. That statement I did not agree with, because to me, it's not cultural genocide, it's genocide. When you take children forcibly from one group and place them with another group, that is genocide. So that's the work that we have been doing and that I am continuing to do, along with a lot of other work. But there are a lot of people who do this work with me. And in the end, if we don't do this work, we know that the result is going to be addiction, incarceration, and death. So we have no choice. So is that my 10 minutes?
Thank you so much, Denise.
Thank you so much, Denise, for sharing your story with us and your experience. This is most definitely important work that you've done. It's very disheartening to know that we have to fight the fight that we're fighting because of all the injustice and the harm. So really want to thank you for speaking with us today and sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to move on to looking at another community in Oakland, California. In Oakland, California, there's 2 counties that do youth restorative diversion programs. It's for low-level felony and high-level misdemeanor charges. Essentially, it is doing it's bringing together the young person, the person who was harmed, members of the community, and family members for them both. It takes months to get to Circle. We have to prep all of the people who are going to participate, and it's by no means easy, but it's necessary, and we get folks in Circle and develop a plan. The plan is usually developed in 4 quadrants, and it's an action plan for the young person to right the harm that they did. It's in 4 like subcategories, because one box is an action that the young person needs to do for themselves, because when you hurt someone, you in turn hurt yourself, right? So one thing the young person needs to do is something for themselves. Then they need to do some sort of action for the person who they hurt. They also need to do something for their community to right the wrong, and also for their family. And these actions can be lots of different things. It could be volunteer, it could be therapy, it can be anything that feels suitable to address the harm. And these circles, we've seen a lot of really great benefits. Not benefits, but we have done we've done participation surveys at the end of these circles, and the surveys show that there is a 91% participant satisfaction when they participate in these circles, and that's also inclusive of their needs being met. So was this circle worth it? Did it address the issue? And people responded really positively to that at majority of the times, right? 91% is a fairly good satisfaction rating. This program tracks young people 12 months, 24 months, and 36 months. And after completing the circle. And the purpose for this is to ensure that there's no contact with police or the punitive system again. And these programs are evidence-based. So we know that there's a participant satisfaction at 91%, which is very high. We know that the amount of folks that the young people that participate have a substantially lower rate of recidivating or of coming into contact with police again. And also, one of the really beautiful things is when you participate in these circles and you develop the plans, is you are able to see where are the shortcomings in your community, what resources, what programs are really necessary in your community to make sure that your community and your young people are able to thrive. And then the next thing we're going to talk about very briefly is a bill that was introduced into the California state legislation in 2019. This bill would have essentially created restorative justice pilot programs for adults. Unfortunately, the bill did not pass because of lack of funding. They didn't want to find money to create these pilot programs. And I wanted to put this to your attention because there's this rhetoric that, you know, we need to have evidence-backed research to show restorative justice works, which was the intent of this pilot, aside from also making sure adults can participate. But then when we don't get the funding, then it's kind of like a catch-22. You want us to prove that these programs work, but you don't fund the programs so they can happen and allow us to capture data and show that it works. So I did just want to briefly bring that to your attention. And now we're going to shift from one side of the US to St. Louis, where we're going to talk to Joshua. Joshua is the Peace Education Program Director in AFSC's St. Louis office, and he has been with AFSC since 2012. So we're going to briefly hear from Joshua.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with starting my video. There we go. Awesome. It's really good to be with you all tonight. As Fatima said, my name is Joshua Salim. I'm here in St. Louis. Wanted to shout out the St. Louis team, Sarah Nash and Jonathan, who have been a part of these webinars last year. And so I'm excited to be with you all and share some of our work tonight. It's really an honor, it feels like an honor to be with you all, especially after what Denise has shared and what Fatima has shared. And feels really good to be in community with you all tonight. I want to begin by just saying that I wasn't always in the restorative justice camp. It's been a journey. And because, like so many of us, I was steeped in our society's punitive paradigm that demands punishment. And if you would have asked me 15 years ago whether I believed kids, young people, students should be suspended, I would have probably said, you know, if they knew what the consequence was and they chose to do whatever they did anyway, then they probably deserve what's coming to them. And part of that socialization for me came from the church. And from an early age, I was given this idea that human beings are inherently, you know, sinful, and there must be punishment for those sins. That idea was continuously driven into my mind, and it connected to theology around hell and atonement, and that those things played a huge part in how I viewed our response to harm that's being done in our society. And you take that religious grounding and you pair it with the narratives that all of us are given around crime and punishment, and you come away thinking that this is just the natural order of things. This is just what we do. And it really wasn't until I got into this work with the AFSC that I came to recognize that the way they are structured currently is extremely harmful. And we've heard some of that harm from Denise and Fatima. I've also come to understand that there is an alternative, and that restorative justice actually is more aligned with how I practice my faith on a day-to-day basis. So I want to give you all an example before I talk about restorative justice in school, because I think this background is important. About a year ago, my wife and I, we park our cars in the back of our house, and there's this little pad that you have to, you know, use an alley to get to. And every once in a while, it happens, you know, maybe once or twice every year, we'll wake up, go outside, taking our kids to school, and we notice that someone's been in our car. And usually they take, you know, just a phone charger or something like that, because that's all we have in our car. But one night we were at home, I put the kids to bed, And I walk back downstairs, and from my kitchen window, I can see the cars, and there was one of the cars had the light on. And so I run outside to see what happened, and the glove compartment was open, and I could tell somebody had gone through the car. And I was heated. And what made me so upset this time was that, I had been upstairs for less than 5 minutes and this happened. And we weren't asleep. This wasn't in the middle of the night. This was like 8 or 9 o'clock. And as I was, standing there by the car looking at it, I wondered what I would have done if I had caught that person. Like if I had come down 2 or 3 minutes earlier and saw that person out there, what would I, what would my response have been? And so I talked to my wife about it when she got home, and both of us were in agreement that it was probably a young person, because again we can see the alley from our kitchen window, and typically it's young people using that as a shortcut. And they saw the car was open, so they took the opportunity. But we knew we didn't want to call the police and put the young person in that pipeline, or in contact with the criminal legal system, because stealing, in Missouri, that's a Class B felony, and we didn't want to have that happen. What we wanted was for that young person or whoever went through the car to understand what that felt like, to be harmed in that way, and to understand like why they did it in the first place. And I think the truth is, if they would have knocked on the door and said, "Hey, you got a phone charger? You got money for a phone charger?" We probably would have given it to them. And I think, unfortunately, the approach that so many schools take is that punitive approach that is modeled in the adult criminal legal system. You have committed a crime, you've broken a rule or a law, and therefore you deserve punishment. And that kind of approach fuels this thing that we call and know as the school to prison pipeline. But how does it fuel the pipeline? Well, we know that suspension and expulsions are not effective at preventing future misbehavior, a future harm. Most students who are suspended once, they go on to be suspended again. Further, the research supports that the reality that the more a student is exposed to punishment in school, the more prone he or she is to going to prison. And so for us, we've done education in this office around the school to prison pipeline issue. The picture that you're seeing in front of you is from a presentation that we did for the staff at one school. After we talked about the pipeline, their task was to create an alternative pipeline that didn't end up in prison, but ended up with, for this group, opportunities for young people where they could thrive and flourish. And in all of our experience in schools, if you talk to teachers and administrators, they're very frank with you in candid conversations, and they'll tell you that suspensions and expulsions just don't work. If the desired goal of discipline is to change behavior, then they will tell you suspensions do not work. In fact, once we got the peer mediation programming up and running, the administrator who was in charge of discipline, he would give young people the option of, he would say, you can take the suspension or you can go to peer mediation, and kind of talk about these issues. And more often than not, young people, they wanted the suspension. They said, give me my 3 days, and so I don't have to talk about it, or be accountable to the community for the harm that I've done. I can just go home, might get into a little bit of trouble, but I don't have to face my fears, my peers, or be accountable. And so, yeah, we know that suspensions just do not work. And we've actually seen the pipeline in action. There was a young person we were connected to in our program. He came to school, was acting as a lookout for a friend who was stealing from another student in the bathroom. They were both expelled. He didn't have a history of stealing or fighting. He was a knucklehead for sure, but he was zero tolerance out of this school. And when he was in between schools, he caught a case and is now in prison. And it does not have to be this way. And so in our work, we focus on helping young people and the community at large see that different vision for how things could be. And so I want to talk about the Real Student Safety Campaign, which is kind of the center of our work currently. You can move to the next slide. But the Real Student Safety Campaign is a local effort to transform school budgets and approaches to student misbehavior. We want to see a divestment from the security and policing of students, that model, and an investment in social workers, counselors, and restorative practitioners. And this is a picture from a march that we co-hosted in July, where we highlighted the fact that St. Louis Public Schools, the school that we've been in, the school district that we've been in for the longest time, spends $6.3 million on security services, and about half that on social workers. And that mirrors the sort of budget that we see in the city at large. The city of St. Louis spends $216 million on police, only 26 million on mental health programs, only 10 million on job programs, only 2 million on youth programs. And so with this Real Student Safety Campaign, we want to see a readjustment of those budget priorities and an investment in things that really make young people safe in schools. And so a part of the work that we do is to help walk with these school districts and help them practice it. Shout out to the team in the Twin Cities who also does this. They actually have a contract with St. Paul Public Schools, I believe, to do circle work in schools. So, definitely check them out. And I want to end. I could say more, but I want to end with this story, because last year we've been doing peer mediation. We've been doing some circle work. Last year we were able to do a reentry or welcome circle for a young person who had been suspended. We weren't able to catch them before they were suspended, but we knew that there was a possibility of a fight as they came back in, because again, suspensions don't get to the root cause of why young people are doing what they're doing. So we suggested a reentry circle that would check in with that young person, offer some support. And it was transformative for that young person, because it was the first time in circle. It was myself, Jonathan Polfus, who's our program associate, an assistant principal, and a teacher. It was the first time that that young person heard that how much she was cared about, how much she was valued, the gifts that everyone saw in her, how much everyone cared about her well-being and success in school. And we all talked about and came to agreement on what she needed to be in order to be successful. And I got a report. There was not another fight after that conversation for the rest of the year. And in fact, it deepened the level of relationship that she had with that teacher. Every time she saw the teacher, one of their agreements was that she would give her a hug. So that happened. And so those are some of the benefits. In addition to seeing a reduction in suspensions, we've got that data that I could share. And I know Fatima is going to go into more benefits of restorative justice, but suspension reduction, building relationships, connection to the school, sense of community, addressing the root cause of issues, and building real safety are some of the things that we've seen in action through the work that we've done with restorative justice and restorative practices. So passing it back to you, Fatima. Thank you.
Wow, that's such great work. Thank you, Joshua. So we've talked about, so now we know that restorative justice will interrupt the school to prison pipeline. We know that restorative justice has been used to address a lot of serious harms in the community, such in New Zealand. We heard Denise speak about Maine. So it seems clear that restorative justice can be something that, if we were to teach these practices and embody these practices in our communities, it sounds like we would then give our communities the ability to, please switch sites. It sounds like we would give the ability to our community to be able to address harms that happen. If we, the community, know how to address and communicate and to deal with harms that come up in a way that is culturally relevant for us, then it doesn't seem like we would need to call police for things. If we teach our communities and we aid our communities in adopting these skills and having these skills. And now, we've talked about a lot of benefits of restorative justice. It reduces recidivism, it addresses root causes so we know what the community actually needs, and it saves a lot of money. So we're going to move into the second part of our webinar. This is where we're going to be sort of in like a Zoom circle together. We're going to get in two different breakout groups. This first breakout group, we're going to be in pairs or groups of 3. And this is where we're going to try to do some community building. And this is so you can understand what is restorative justice when you're practicing it. What does it feel like? Under normal circumstances, we would be doing this entire webinar. We wouldn't be doing it over Zoom. We would be doing it in a circle together. So what we're going to do is have our circle over Zoom slightly. And the first question is meant to be lighthearted. It's sort of like an intro question. And then the second question is going to be intentionally it's going to require you to be a little bit more vulnerable and take a deeper dive. So before we get into our breakout groups, we have some community agreements, right? We want to make sure that people can agree to speak from the heart and listen respectfully. And we also want to agree to confidentiality. We're going to be sharing some personal things with each other coming up, and we want to make sure that it doesn't leave the safe space that the pairs or the small breakout groups have created. So we're going to switch slides. And the first breakout session, we're going to answer 2 questions. The first question you're going to talk about in your group is, share the last time you laughed out loud and what was it that made you laugh. So each person is going to answer this question first. And then once everyone has answered the first question, you're going to move on to the second question. The second question is, share a time in which you reacted or acted in a way that was not aligned with your values, and what was it that you needed? So to get folks to think about harms and needs, that's kind of why this question is written the way that it is. So think about a time where you behaved in a way that you wouldn't ordinarily behave in, a way that a situation in which you were not your best self, and what caused it, and how can you what was it that you needed, right? What did you need in order to act and be your best self? So we're going to be broken into small breakout groups. It's going to be about 2 or 3 people, and our breakout groups are going to be we have 8 minutes here. I believe we have everyone back. So thank you for sharing in the first breakout group. We want you to feel free to turn your cameras off if you would like, and just take a minute and sit and breathe and sit with your feelings and think, how was that? What was that like, sharing with someone who you didn't know, being vulnerable with someone? Did it feel good? How did you feel? Just sit for a minute. Okay, thank you so much. We are going to move on to the next slide. We're going to welcome everyone back. And here's the next breakout session we're going to move into. So this next breakout session, we're going to have 15 minutes. And you'll see on your screen a few different questions. So these are the practical questions that we want to start talking about. We want to envision, where in your community would you like to see restorative justice? How do you want it to be embodied? What impact do you think restorative justice programs would have on your community? And what are some barriers for restorative justice to be practiced in your community as a response to harms? We're going to break out into slightly larger groups this time, and we're going to have 15 minutes to just envision communities and what it would look like if we were relying on restorative justice more than we are at the moment. And how are we going to get there? So we will shortly be broken out into another breakout session. Hello, it looks like we have everybody back. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the facilitators of the groups that we just came back from put in the chat and report back very briefly. We are coming up on a little bit of a time crunch. So what we're going to do is the facilitators are going to give a report back of the second breakout group. And For folks that just want to talk about the first breakout group, what it was like sitting in space with just another person and talking, please feel free to put in the chat how that was for you, the first experience of the breakout group.
Well, our group talked a lot about, the systemic areas that we could see this, whether it was in the school system or with alternatives to incarceration. And then there was also this conversation about what Joshua spoke to earlier about the punishment paradigm and how that work really has to start within, thinking of like, what are the things that we have to uproot in ourselves in order to be practitioners of restorative justice in our everyday lives, and that systemic work is really important, but so is that personal and interpersonal work that we can do in relationship with folks.
Thank you. Sounds so great. We see that some people talked about the first group being really warm and friendly. It was great to see how much they had in common. People really liked sharing in the one-on-ones. People in their second breakout group are talking about community and different ways they want to see RJ in their communities. That was great. So this all sounds really good. We are coming up on time here. So as people keep sharing their experiences in the breakout groups, I'm going to pass it off to Laura, who's going to close for us real quick.
Well, I hope that everyone had a wonderful experience tonight. I learned so much, and hearing about the various examples about how restorative justice is practiced in many different settings and in the many different roles and ways in which it can be so useful in our communities. And want to thank you for the wonderful conversation in the breakout sessions. It was that was also quite informative. We hope that you are so intrigued by what you heard today. If this was your first time joining us, we hope you will consider joining us again. You can see from the webinars that we have posted up on the slide in front of you that we are going to have a number of upcoming webinars continuing our exploration of beyond policing, monthly webinars and community conversations that are going to happen between April and July. And you see the topics, the range of topics there. We would love to have you join us again. We're going to have an opportunity for you to join up you can sign up for one or all of them, I think. So as many as you have interest in, and I think you will find them informative and knowledgeable and give you something that you can also take with you so that you can learn more about it. We have provided a resource list so that you can delve more deeply into this topic should you desire, and gives you some more information as you talk with folks in your communities. I know some of you are part of organizations or groups or folks in your communities who are already exploring this, and some of this topic is to some of you kind of new, and I appreciate you all exploring something that was maybe a little different, and I hope you've learned something that you can take with you. We will have this. I believe that we are going to make this recording available for folks who participated, so you can take a look at it. Perhaps you might want to share it with others who might be interested. And if there's anything, I was just looking to see if there's anything that I am missing. I know my colleagues will be kind enough to let me know if that is the case. But we want to thank you for joining us this evening. We don't want to hold folks because it was very kind of you to spend the hour and a half with us tonight. And we're just looking up to see if there's anything else. I don't see anything that I need to say more in the chat. But thank you so much for joining us. And please enjoy the rest of your day or the rest of your evening.